Welcome to the Creatio No Code Playbook podcast, where we discuss insights, tips, and success stories on how to leverage the no code approach to transform business and deliver applications of any complexity. I'm your host, Jason Miller, head of pre-sales at Creatio here in the Americas. Today, we're continuing our conversation with Burley Kawasaki, founder of Tachyon Solutions and co-author of the No Code Playbook. Burley, welcome back.
Thanks, Jason. Happy to be here.
So, in our first discussion, we talked a lot about the early parts of the playbook. We talked about understanding what no code was, kind of the intro to no code. We talked about some new terms, things like no code creator or citizen developers. And we talked about how no code has risen in popularity over the last several years and why now is the right time to write the book. We're going to continue that discussion. We're going to talk about a little bit more of the deeper topics that you and Catherine wrote about in the book. And we're going to kind of pick up somewhere in the chapter 8 area, talking about options analysis. But before we get there, I want to make a couple of distinctions, two things that you talk about in the No Code Playbook. The first being picking a delivery model, and then we're going to go to options analysis about what system to implement. So when you talk about early on in the book, you talk about picking a delivery model, and you talk about developing, COEs, Center of Excellence. You talk about doing it yourself or some mix thereof. What were some of the things that you were thinking about and helping to design the matrix that you've got in the book around picking the right delivery model?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. The application matrix sort of emerged, I would say, as a concept as we were writing and fleshing out the methodology. And it really had to do with the fact that we wanted to keep the methodology sort of lightweight and simple for simpler apps, but we knew that there was this range of complexity that the enterprise wrestled with, and as you got into more complex mission critical business processes, or you got into more regulated industries, that you needed to build in more robustness and into the methodology. And we sort of emerged. There was an aha moment at one point that you really can't have a one-size-fits-all methodology that applies equally to both the simple as well as the more complex sort of use cases and scenarios. And so we needed to have a way to scale it. And so this notion of the application matrix sort of emerged, which was, can you find a way to sort of assess the complexity of your application? And we ultimately ended up sort of picking sort of three dimensions. There's a business complexity, a governance complexity, and a technical complexity. And if you sort of score or grade, the app and the use case that you're trying to address, then this would help decide like how much of the process to use and also how to scale the organization. And so, and again, that wasn't in sort of the earliest stages of some of the thinking, but it emerged because we realized we had to, if this was going to be scalable up and down for a customer.
So when you talk about those three different areas of complexity, right? Business complexity, governance complexity, and technical complexity, you're really also talking about different groups within the business, right? We're talking about the business processes. So how complex or convoluted are the business processes? And we could have a whole nother discussion that we won't have today around unwinding business processes and optimizing business processes. But that kind of focuses on the business users. When you talk about technical complexity, that may be something that aligns around data locations, integrations. It could also align to number of systems within an overall architecture. And then there's governance complexity, which is more around how are you going to maintain things from an InfoSec standpoint, or HIPAA, or PII. What are some of those things? Did you weight those any differently, or did you think about all of those things kind of as an equal weight when you put together the matrix?
Well, as you pointed out, it starts to get into who needs to be involved, and I think that's in some ways more important than weighting, because all of the complexity actually is important and requires different skill sets. It's just the skill sets in where they sit inside your organization will vary. When you think about business complexity, a lot of the complexity around the business process or use cases, and how that may vary by region or by by department. A lot of that is complex, but it actually sits typically inside the business. And so I would argue that the business function or the business group that is sort of sponsoring, this no code application probably has a lot of that knowledge in house, right? And so we have this concept of a do it yourself model, right? Where the business team can take on a lot of this because they understand that, and they're in many ways the best ones to make sure they're meeting the needs of the process or the business. When you get into the technical complexity, to your point, there's a lot of technologies and nuances about systems of a record that you're integrating with, or scale of user transactions, right? And so there's things there that do require, in many cases, some amount of technical knowledge, and may require developers. And so we have this notion. It's actually one that Gartner has talked about and sort of coined the term fusion teams, which is it's a combination of both the business and the technologists working together in there's different org models. Sometimes they're embedded inside the business themselves. You just have a developer on loan. In other cases, it's more of a matrix where the development and IT may have a dotted line person that works for the project. So I'm not making a statement about org per se, but it's a combined sort of set of skills and knowledge between development and business. That's sort of the fusion team model. Then there's a third one, which we called out, which was in some ways, trying to make sure that, the broadest set of views around sort of the process and the methods get applied, and that it's really around the center of excellence model, which helps support a lot of the more complex governance needs, as you pointed out. It might be external governance, might be internal governance, might be infosec, and also the whole notion. One of the concepts we talk a lot about is around component reuse and composability. I think that's a really key function that the CUE can enable and play. So it's perhaps looking more broadly than just that single project, but how do we anticipate perhaps certain parts of this application either creating reusable components that may be used by other teams, or vice versa, reusing components that may have been built by other teams. So there's a collaboration in a reuse function that the CUE plays. So those three sort of organizational models, the DIY, fusion, and center of excellence, just have important talent that is needed, and they typically sit in different parts of the org. And so we talk about, how do you diagnose, do you need them? That's sort of the first question, and that's really the goal of the app matrix. And then the second part of this is, how do you organize and how do you bring them together into an effort to help make sure that your project is ultimately successful?
Yeah, and I think for those that are still a little bit uninitiated and maybe haven't had a chance to read the playbook yet, the idea is not dissimilar to that of putting together a multi-talented or multi-dimensional Scrum team. But the idea is really around understanding when you need, like you said, understanding when you need to bring those folks together based upon some certain characteristics that you talk about in the book. So I'd like to transition to the next topic. Yeah, go ahead, bro.
No, I was going to say, and over time, as the process mature, it's I don't think it's uncommon to see that the processes do get more sophisticated, more complex. But the goal again is to not overburden the simple projects from being able to still be very sort of nimble and lightweight. And so just because you have an enterprise-wide view and you have a COE and you have lots of governance doesn't mean that every project needs to go through that. So it's important, a lot of this isn't just about scaling up, but it's about scaling down so that your small projects, again, can be fast and can be just as nimble as they might be if they were just the first project you were doing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest value props that I always talk to folks about when it comes to no code, is the fact that you don't have to have that big enterprise scale for some of these small use cases, right? A lot of times these small use cases just sat in a backlog, sat in a backlog, sat in a backlog because there wasn't enough business value there to justify the ROI and the developer investment. So I think that's a good point, and we'll kind of leave that there. But the next topic I want to talk about is an area that you talk about, which is options analysis. And that's chapter 8 in the book. Now, options analysis is not the who will deliver, but it's what we should do or what systems we should use from a platform standpoint and from a solution standpoint. I'm going to throw up a quick graphic here because in the book you talk about three areas. You talk about packaged applications, custom development, and no code platforms. So if you could talk to us a little bit about why you think certain flexibility is not there in packaged applications that is needed, why that may take you towards no code or vice versa, why you would go no code versus custom app dev. I think that's a burning question that a lot of folks are still asking themselves.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and you know, I would say we've become accustomed to this notion of buy versus build. That you have those two options, right? If you want speed, you want to have sort of the maximum amount of sort of functionality out of the box, right? You buy from packaged software, and in this day and age, there's a SaaS application for virtually every business or every function. And then on the other side, if you want something really sort of unique that differentiates your business process or that is adapted to your specific operating procedures, then you can custom build. And so those are sort of the two ends of the spectrum. And I think, over the, time, the decades that people have sort of become used to buy versus build, they realize that there's not necessarily a perfect fit sometimes, because you don't want to build something from scratch, partly because you don't want to not only spend all the time and effort it takes to just build the most basics of functionality, but also then it's the support and maintenance and updates. So people are I think aware of the challenges when you build from scratch, but then they also want to be able to configure it and be very agile in terms of the way that they adapt the functionality in the process and use it as a differentiator for their business. And so they really want some sort of middle ground. And I think no code can be and is that middle ground for a lot of companies, where it gives them the the speed and time to market advantages that out of the box provides, but it still gives them the flexibility of customization. And in particular, when you think about no code, that comes with increasingly, this notion, and a lot of vendors, have this about different app templates, right? That you may be able to go out to a marketplace and you may be able to find templates that are a starting point and pre-configured for different functional or vertical business processes. This is again a great way to get a lot of the benefits of out of the box, but still maintain the adaptability, the customization, configuration, really benefits of no code. So I would say it's been sort of this nice middle ground that for a lot of companies really hits sort of the sort of the middle between those two sort of opposing forces sometimes, and I think that's partly why it's been so popular.
I think you hit on one really big point that I think a lot of people miss a lot of times is that no code is probably drives the most flexibility, right? And like you said, having that ability to bring these composable applications or even down to a composable architecture that you can replicate easily, deploy easily, is really what drives a lot of the rapid deployment methodology. When we talk about, and we're going to talk about everyday delivery here in just a few minutes, but it really helps you accelerate getting things to market, right? So faster to start, faster to finish. Obviously, that drives a much faster beginning to your ROI cycle, which brings down typically your total cost of ownership as well, because you're not spending as much time or professional service dollars with external firms helping build those things out. So I think that was a really good summary. And again, the graphics in chapter 8 when the folks get to the book. I want to shift topics now, and we've got about 10 minutes left here. I want to shift topics and really go into the go live section of the book. And you've got 5 chapters in there that talks about everything from prototyping to MVP, putting in feedback loops so that you're collecting feedback from the users and making incremental daily changes to help either improve the processes, make better use of the application, and also the governance checks. Talk to us a little bit about how you think about that first release cycle, that prototyping to go live and getting that MVP defined, and how you roll that out in a way that it brings business value right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, I'll start. I had quotes sort of highlighted for each of the chapters, and Jason and I were talking about this before the show about one of his favorite quotes. It's one of mine as well. Is the quote from Mario Andretti, who says, "If everything seems under control, you're not going fast enough." And I would say that sort of is really at the heart and soul of this stage of the life cycle, which is, you will feel like things are moving very rapidly because they are, and I think that's the power of sort of this go live approach, which is, you're not trying to strive for perfection, and a lot of times people, especially those that are used to, traditional software cycles that are long, that are, you know are sort of uncertain, perhaps in terms of how frequently you may get features delivered from development or IT. Like there's a natural instinct, I think, to strive for perfection, get every last requirement in, because it may be a while before you get another release. So jam it all in while you can, which is counter to this notion of everyday delivery and trying to unlock value, rapidly, get feedback, identify enhancements, keep adding those in, and once you make this shift, and it's not only a shift for the team that is building the app, but it's a shift for the end users, because when they realize that, oh, when they make a request, I put in my request this morning and it showed up in the app this afternoon or the next day, then they start relaxing a little bit, and instead of striving for this perfection, which you will never get to as a singular release, but you can get to perfection over time, right? And so that really encompasses both the prototype MVP stage, which is about how do you break down and decompose things into small units of value, that you can very rapidly iterate and deliver on, have feedback that you can get immediately. And we talk in the playbook about different mechanisms and ways to gather feedback. Sometimes you have to invest a little bit in terms of process and tooling to make sure you can get as much feedback as you want. You don't want to just sort of let people shoot you emails, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so they say. You want to have a structured way of collecting feedback and getting the diverse feedback. But once you get a proper loop that allows you to process continuously feedback from your stakeholders, from your end users, and you really take full advantage of the speed and rapid ability to introduce small use cases into the application, then that really sort of sets up this continuous flywheel approach, as opposed to waiting for big releases.
You also talk about, in this section of the book, you talk about the governance checks and making sure, not just having those feedback loops, but making sure that you've got the right, eyes on the product. You've got the right people in the Fusion team thinking about what governance needs to apply, thinking about criticality and severity, right? The normal organizational risk models that you think about. Talk to us a little bit about how the governance check process is different using no code than it is in, call it, a traditional software development lifecycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is a really important topic. It's I think one of the biggest fears that certainly IT has, right? It's the classic shadow IT concern. Oh, if I just let people start building apps, and they're not trained, or not following the right process compliance, and bad things will happen, right? And there's a risk, or a part of truth in that, but I would actually argue that that will happen regardless, right? If people are going to try to go crazy, you actually want them to have a standard toolbox. You want them to have a standard process. You want to have some guidance that helps steer them in ways that then will help ensure your ability to stay compliant. And so, rather than just sort of let your business teams go off and hand select point solutions here and apps there and this and that, which will definitely, I think, potentially create a lot of security or governance issues down the stream, having a validated, sort of proven and tested, standard no code platform actually is a way to steer the business to do the right thing ultimately. And so so I say getting the right sort of underlying process and tools in place is sort of the first step, and that's a one-time effort to make sure that's in place um, from a no-code platform. Then beyond that, it comes down to, we just talked about the app matrix. Not every app will necessarily warrant going through the full process. Some may not have sensitive data, right? Or some may be, in areas that aren't covered or regulated by the same level of sort of governance. And so, for those, you want to make sure they still have the freedom to move quickly. But the ones that do have either, sensitive, PII data, or that may be covered by a certain type of industry regulation or certification checklist. I mean, make sure that those do follow the process. The whole notion of go live and moving as fast as you can does not give you a pass from following the sort of governance checks, but it's knowing which apps need to, and then providing as much as possible a checklist in sort of reusable framework so that the teams can efficiently perform the governance checks, as opposed to having to figure it out on their own, which is again the way a lot of shadow IT sort of gets into trouble. Is you have them trying to climb the hill themselves without giving them the basic tools for where to go.
I find it very interesting. So, what you just described is a couple of things. One, providing a set of tools from a toolbox and standards, call it the guide rails, right? Letting the IT and governance folks set those boundaries with either a platform or a couple of different platforms to really help drive some of that business transformation. It's interesting as the no code playbooks come out and some other manuals that are out there. There's been a great debate on LinkedIn and other social platforms and conversation around, well, should companies be looking at one platform or should they be looking at, like you talked about, multiple point solutions that are out there? And I think the answer is it depends on how much governance you want to apply. Obviously, the larger the solution, the larger the impact of the business. My personal belief is you want to have one platform. It's easier to maintain. It's easier to govern from an enterprise standpoint, right? If you're just a small little organization, you can have two or three or four maybe small no code tools in your arsenal. But would you agree that the larger the enterprise gets, the more governance needs to probably be in place for what you're doing, and therefore the consolidation of platforms is really one of the core values that a no code tool can add?
I would agree. And we sort of talked about this earlier, in the options analysis. Simpler is usually always better, right? And while you may, initially think that, oh, this particular platform has some slight capability or differences than another, and so each team or each function should, pick the one that's best suited for them. I think you ultimately realize that, you just can't support that kind of complexity, and it's not just the large ones. I would argue smaller ones in particular. I've talked to a lot of sort of small enterprises, and they just don't have the IT staff to support two or three different no code tools. They ended up picking one largely because of their sort of internal talent wanting to concentrate their skills in a single tool set or technology. Plus, I would say even outside of the technology and vendor complexity, there's this process and methodology complexity, right? Of every vendor is a little different, and so you do end up tailoring some of the process and the methods for that vendor's capability. And so if you have too many variants, your methodology and the process of building apps will start to get more complex as well. So is it always best to only have one? Not necessarily, but simpler is generally better.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. And Burley, I think some of the information you provided us over the last couple of podcasts and time that we spent together has been absolutely invaluable. I do encourage folks that are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, if you have not yet read the the no code playbook. Got myself there. If you haven't read the No Code Playbook yet by Catherine Kostareva and Burley Kawasaki, I do encourage you to pick it up. You can download copy from Amazon, or you can go to the Creatio.com website and get your copy. Burley, thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Always love to hear your insights on this topic. Well, there again, we've learned a lot about the hype about no-code development and the power of no-code platforms. The benefits are real, and Burley has absolutely helped us understand this, not only in the no-code playbook, but also in the discussions that we've had over the last couple of podcasts. For those of you who are watching us, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please be sure and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more. For those of you who are listening to us on your favorite platform, I hope you enjoyed the podcast and had a great time. Check out our previous episodes on the various platforms of the No Code Playbook podcast: Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and many more. To get more information about our products and services, visit www.creatio.com and get more insights to check out our No Code events page. We'll talk again soon.